So good to be with you. I've watched the Augustine Institute for years and appreciated what it's doing. Congratulations on your really fabulous and beautiful new campus, or newish campus here. I'm very grateful for the invitation. Professor Wennerstrom plays an outsized role in the imagination of two of my children whom he taught Latin, or attempted to teach Latin to some years ago. And my son, we rent this place in the Pocono Mountains every year, and Carl came up once or twice with friends of his, former students of mine. And Carl was sort of famous for sleeping in hammocks at the time, including sleeping in hammocks inside of buildings. He would hang hammocks from the rafters and sleep in them. And so my 18-year-old son, whenever he camps, he sort of hangs a hammock for Professor Wennerstrom, and that gives me some pause, because I think he should have better role models. So I had a book come out in late December 2023 called Lost in the Chaos, Immanence, Despair, Hope. I have always been a big fan of Walker Percy's 1983 book, Lost in the Cosmos, which, if you've read it, is a strange, bizarre book. It's the last self-help book. The first sections of it are these beautiful, brilliant little thought experiments, and then there's a strange section about semiotics, and then it ends with the end of the world in Tennessee, and it's very strange. But the last time I taught it to students, I was aware that the questions that Percy was asking in 1983 were, he had read when he was ill, a lot of Kierkegaard, a lot of Gabriel Marcel. He was asking questions of a generation for whom existentialism made sense. And when I was dealing with my own students, I found them to be somewhat cold about those questions. That sort of like burning need for authenticity was not their experience. And so I came to the conclusion that while Percy was writing for a world in which people were lost in the cosmos, many of my own students were not lost in the cosmos, but lost in the chaos, which I think is somewhat of a different experience. So I'm not going to give you a talk about the book. I think one of the cardinal sins that academics do is they give you a book talk, and they just say over and over again, well, in the book, and then they give you a bad summary of that section, then they say in the book, and they give you a bad summary of the next section. I'm going to give you some of the arguments from the book, but I'm not going to, I hope, say in the book, unless in question and answers you ask me really hard questions, at which point I'll say, this was better explained in the book. Long known and praised in Italy, English translations of the novelist Elena Ferrante have turned her into a literary sensation, although we don't know who it is, it's a pen name. This has included television series, film adaptations, and so on. The fiction in its entirety is about the trials of women, and they are among the most despair-ridden fiction that I've ever encountered. One of the novellas, not the famous Neapolitan series, but a novella called The Days of Abandonment, begin with Olga's husband blandly announcing that he was leaving Olga. It's entirely uneventful. It's described as Mario closed the front door carefully and was gone, leaving Olga's in anguish and rage growing within her, terrified that she is going to become like a woman she remembers from her own childhood, a woman who has lost even her own name and is referred to only as the Poverella, that poor woman. Abandoned, Olga is in free fall. She views herself as unloved, and she loves no one. She views even her own children as loathsome and repellent. They have consumed her, she feels. And she says this, quote, she feels like a lump of food that her children have chewed without stopping, a cud made of living material to allow two greedy bloodsuckers to nourish themselves. The morning after her own failed attempt at an affair, she awakens in a state of profound disorientation. She's suffering vertigo of both space and time. She doesn't recognize where she is, and she keeps getting past, present, and future confused. Her young daughter, Ilaria, complains that the brother, Gianni, has been ill in the night and is thrown up on her own bed. When she goes to see Gianni, he's ill. He has a dangerously high fever. As Olga cleans the mess, she's not thinking about Gianni. She is fixating on her own perceived loss of beauty. A loss inevitable, she thinks, for all women, turning all women into the Poverella. Again, Gianni is sick. Again, she cleans him, but she sinks into more and more madness. She is certain, she says, that she has arrived at the edge of some precipice, and now I am falling. In the middle of this madness, and it's hard to describe the madness of these scenes, an awful odor confronts her. Not the vomit of her son, but the bloody stool, drool, and vomit of her dog. Perhaps, she's uncertain, poisoned with insecticide that she has used for ants. To Olga's horror, the dog squirms into his master's study, her husband's study, the husband who has abandoned her, as if looking for comfort from Mario. At that moment, Gianni requests that she call Daddy. Never mind that he's useless, a deadbeat father, or that she is there with Gianni in his need. He repeats, but call Daddy. Daddy is the one who will know what to do, he says. But Daddy has left. Olga eventually gathers herself to call both the vet and the doctor. But the telephone doesn't work because she has forgotten to pay the bills. It leaves only a faint hiss in her ears. The cell phone, too, is broken because she's broken it in a fit of rage. She tries impotently to rubber band the two halves together, but that doesn't work. She has no connection to the outside world. She is in her abandonment. She decides it's time to leave the apartment, but the key is jammed in the lock. It's immovable. Some months before, Olga had hired workmen to install new locks and to reinforce the door because she was worried that her ex-husband was sneaking in. But now the key won't turn. Neither can she extract the key from the lock, and the door is now too strong to pry off its hinges or to break through. She's trapped. It's also late August in Naples. Everyone has gone on vacation at the shore. At that moment, she again reverts to the third person, disassociating. The scene is intense. Ants are swarming the dog. The phones provide no connection. The apartment block is empty. The door is immovable. She's trapped in this room with its disgusting stench of death. Trying the phone again, she hoped for a kind of magic. And what she says that she finds is nothing, nothing, nothing. Eventually, the dog dies with an intense pain in its body, a gnashing of teeth, and a final bark. Olga bursts out in tears, and suddenly, without warning, there's a knock on the door, prompting this response from Ilaria. Daddy, she murmurs, full of hope. But it's not her father. Her hope is for naught. It's a cheery novella. My wife, when I gave her this chapter to read, she skimmed it and said, I will not give your book to any of my friends. And I said, oh, but there's a chapter 9, which is all about hope. And she said, but chapter 1 has no hope. So, part 1, disenchanted imminence. For Olga, there's no beyond. She's trapped. There's no landline, there's no cell phone, there's no exit. She's confined within, with nothing, nothing, nothing beyond. And within this room, within this life, illness, confusion, stench, and death. Now, I think it can't be more blunt. There once was a daddy who could have acted and helped. The age of belief in God the Father. But Daddy's gone. Daddy's left. She's left alone in her abandonment. Moderns consider themselves alone in the universe with no God. They are, as Olga is, trapped in her room. Moderns view themselves to be encased within immanence, with no connection to the transcendent. What remains is that illness which is life, with its inexorable trajectory towards death. Now, consider Charles Taylor's exploration of immanence in a secular age, where he places contemporary experience within what he calls the immanent frame. You imagine the picture frame, that's where we live, and that's just immanence. And beyond the picture frame? Now, in Taylor's account, there is an important difference between our time and times previous, particularly in what counts as fullness, human flourishing. Moving from a period of time in which our highest aspirations pointed us inescapably toward God, make no sense without God, to a time in which we understand, or many people understand, human flourishing and well-being as being capable of being fulfilled without God. Now, it seems to me that a world in which our highest aspirations can be accomplished without God, and a world in which our highest aspirations are thought impossible without God, are categorically different worlds. Taylor suggests that we live in a world of exclusive humanism, a world in which anything other than merely human flourishing is excluded from the conversation. Disenchantment soon follows, he says. Consider an example that Taylor provides, Candlemas. At Candlemas, you take your candles to be blessed by the Paschal candle, maybe some holy water put upon them. What happens is your very ordinary candle receives something of the power, or Taylor's language, magic of the Paschal candle. Your ordinary candle becomes charged, as it were, the way that holy water is charged, participating in some efficacy beyond merely the power to bathe or to cast light. In a stormy night, when the devil's prowled or ghosts haunted, I've heard that the mansion over there is haunted, so you may want your blessed Paschal candle. Relighting the blessed candle enkindled not only light and its psychological relief, but a power strong enough to keep devils at bay. The candle has become charged or infused with a power not of its own. Now, in addition to accepting that things had power, a world of enchantment views that objects and people are porous. Power can enter into things, either benevolent or malevolent power. The candle is no longer merely wax and wick. It's a sacramental. The paschal candle in its power, its blessing, has entered into it, transformed it somehow. The evil eye or the hex can actually get into you and do something to you because you're not buffered, you're porous. Bread appears as bread, but is now something quite different. Things are porous. Power can go into things, power can come out of things, into persons and out of persons. Nothing is perfectly self-contained or impermeable or buffered. Now, we no longer live in such a world as a starting point. Your imagination may give in to fancy when there's a bump in the night, but I suspect that you're very quick to say, it's nothing, it's only the dog, at worst a burglar. We're very slow to conclude that there's a devil or a ghost in the house, and we're even slower to reach for the candle to exorcise the demon. Even religious people don't first think devils are near, and the normal and well-adjusted among us hesitate to tell even our priests, let alone our neighbors, let alone our in-laws, about our spooky visitors. Now, of course, we all know that there are people who think of ghosts and devils and winds at first and winds and robbers at last resort. We all know people like this, right? They're weird. They're like people who attend Renaissance fairs. Or who take Tolkien a little too seriously and teach themselves Elvish. Or own a replica of Gandalf's staff. No offense, Professor Venestrom. I used to use Harry Potter's wand as an example, but it offended everyone in the room. So I went to everyone in the room under 35. So I went to Gandalf's staff, which offends only the true Tolkienites. And here's Taylor's point. For modern people, it's very easy to take the tone that there's nothing there. It's just a wind and the robber. It's the starting point. We've become accustomed to what Roger Scruton calls nothing butism. That's nothing but a psychological problem. It doesn't require an exorcism. That's nothing but a chemical imbalance. It's not a possession. That's where we start in the modern world. Consequently, faith, which Taylor thinks is certainly plausible and possible, he's not given us a subtraction theory where faith must disappear. It's on its back foot. It's not the starting point or the first principle for leading a normal, full life. For a whole lot of people in the modern West, fullness, happiness, flourishing is possible, or they think it is, with a hefty bank account, health, and good friends. The world is very easily viewed by them as flat, one-dimensional, lacking any vertical relation between this world and the beyond. Faith is an option, but it's just one option among many. And as you know, even we faithful sort of look over our shoulder and think, I was told they wouldn't be happy without faith, and they seem to be doing just fine. Now, while the modern self loses something in disenchantment, we lose the magic, we gain something too, Taylor says, or we think we do, which is autonomy. If humans can't be permeated by alien powers, then we're independent. As Taylor tells the story, this change allows for what he calls the age of reform, which is the attempt to promote human development and human perfection through human means. If priests and bishops and popes have lost the magic and the power of the magic, then all believers, and then eventually all people, are first capable and then required to operate at the highest speed of their natural and moral capacity. Now, obviously, this indicates a merely natural project. This is what we do through education or enlightenment or technology or a project. Grace wanes, and it's replaced by merely human means of perfecting our life. It takes the place of what was previously thought to be grace in the sacraments. Christian theism evolves or devolves into deism. God remains perhaps a logical necessity, maybe, but for the deist, God might as well be dead because he doesn't do anything, and eventually he will be. He wasn't in any way active in the world for the deist except by abstract providence, meaning the laws of nature, which we can know rationally and then discard God, so we will. Now, I'm here condensing Taylor's very long and complicated story. But the point is this, for a whole lot of contemporary people, there is simply no supernatural happiness to worry about. There's just imminent concerns, temporal well-being. We know that we're capable of providing clean water, clean energy, and clear skin, and those are the only reasonable concerns to have. To pay attention to the beyond, to pay attention to beatitude, is a waste of time. Moderns, Taylor thinks, even those who are religious, live and move and have their being within the immanent frame. It's what is first for us, and reality is immanentized. Now, I'm suggesting, though, that we feel ourselves to be a little bit without hope. And what I'm suggesting is that we turn to false hopes. I'm going to call them idols. The Brits would say idols, I-D-Y-L-L-S. Right? An idyll or an idol is an overly bucolic and pastoral scene. It looks very pleasant. It's like a Kincaid painting, if you remember those. Everything looks pleasant, but it's not dealing with reality the way it is. It's also etymologically related to idols in the sense of false idols. So an overly bucolic vision of hope, which is not a true vision of hope, is an idol and idolatry. The first one I want to suggest is rationalism. The turn to inner worldly justice or inner worldly perfection results in, I think, the idol of rationalism. By that I mean this, a political plan or a political project dominated by inner worldly religious commitments and human efforts. You can think about all the urgency that we have about politics. We no longer think of politics as in the clear second or third place of concern. Politics is the first concern. Yeah? If you know the journal First Things, the title, as I understand it, comes from Hadley Arcus's book First Things, reminding us that the first things are not political things. We tend to think of political things as the first and maybe the only things. Think about the amount of passion and billions having been spent in the last months on politics and the quasi-religious fervor giving to political urgency. Now, in light of that prevalent mood of urgency, I've really come to appreciate the thought of Michael Oakeshott, especially his book Rationalism in Politics. Here's his commentary on the character type or the mood of the rationalist. Here's how he describes the rationalist. The rationalist suffers a deep distrust of time, an impatient hunger for eternity, an irritable nervousness in the face of anything topical or transitory. Another way of putting it is this. Rationalists look for perfection. They look for uniformity. And they want perfection and uniformity immediately and completely. Incompleteness and shoddiness offend them. And they demand the placidity and stability of eternity, even now, even in our political things. Now, the term rationalist might be somewhat confusing. If you study the history of philosophy, when you hear rationalist, you might think Descartes or Leibniz or something. That's not what Oakeshott means. He means a tone of mind, a character type. It's a character type which has an irritated need to be certain and have things fixed and to be irritated by the merely probable or the good enough. For the rationalist, the politically good enough is not nearly good enough. They have an anxious repulsion at the disorder of the merely good enough. The partially ordered outrages them. He says they have a well-trained intellect, which is highly tuned for analysis, programs, and projects, but not at all for the accumulation of political wisdom or prudence. If you know your Aristotle, we do not ask of different disciplines the same level of certainty. You don't ask for probability from a geometer, and you don't ask for certainty from a rhetorician. The rhetorician can only give you probability. Here's the probably persuasive argument. Whereas in Euclidean geometry, 42 degrees isn't going to cut it. It's 45 and can't be anything other than 45. The rationalist wants our politics to be that way. There's one plan and only one, and it must happen now, and everyone must agree. And we must bring about eternity now. Now, of all human endeavors, politics seems that it might be the most resistant to rationalism. Since politics, of course, or at least for Aristotelians like me, is the domain of contingent action, deliberation, freedom, compromise, the transitory, and uncertainty. We do the best we can in politics. Maybe so, says Oakeshott, and yet the temper and mood of the rationalist is evident wherever and whenever political activity consists in bringing the social, political, legal, and institutional inheritance of a society before the tribunal of intellect and finds it always wanting. It needs perfection now. For the rationalist, destruction and creation come much more naturally than reform or patching up. They don't want to ameliorate conditions. They want eternity now. No patience for the best in the circumstances. You must alter the circumstances so that it fits the ideal. As a result, you get a kind of perfectionism in politics. And it's always going to be a politics of uniformity. There's only one right answer, and everyone must see it. Everyone must see it now, and it must be applied the same in every place. It has no recognition for the variation. Now, in all honesty, with the idol of rationalism, and here I'll be interested to see if you agree with me or not, okay? With this idol of rationalism, I am currently more concerned with my friends on the right than I am with my friends on the left. Oakeshott suggests that rationalism has infected all the political views and all the political parties. At the same time, he says that it's generally been the left which has suffered the temptation for rationalism. But I see big promises and new theorists coming from the right, including a newly resurgent version of the religious right. Think the Christian nationalists, the real ones, not just the ones who aren't Christian nationalists, who are called Christian nationalists because they happen to live in a nation and be Christian. I mean the real Christian nationalists, or the integralists, or that odd form of the post-religious right infused with a form of Nietzschean vitalism. Think the readers of Bronze Age Pervert. Now, their plans to me all seem like ideological visions of technique. The administrative state will fix things, or Rome will fix things, because Rome is good at governance. That's a joke. Or the common good will fix things, or a new Aristotelian elite will fix things, or a better nationalism will fix things, or working out and avoiding seed oils will fix things politically. But it turns out that at the end, we're left with human beings as they always are. Free and still responsible. They're able to live in harmony with the truth as they understand it, and they are responsible to form their own intellects and their own conscience to exercise their freedom. But freedom it remains, and even when that freedom is performed miserably, inattentively, unintelligently, unreasonably, and irresponsibly, it's their freedom. However much we wish that we might be gods outside of time, or that the God outside of time might wave his hands and solve our political problem, we're left with the normal political realities, namely ignorance and conversion, repentance and forgiveness, dependent rational animals, limited creatures subject to error. Walker Percy says that one of the great temptations of our age is angelism, the desire to live as angels. But every human being doesn't live as an angel. They live out in the drama of existence in his or her own way, and with great risk, because they gain or lose heaven, embrace or reject love, form friendships and romances, or sink into loneliness, become sages or fools under their own free will. That's idol 1, rationalism in politics. Idol 2, weird religion. If rationalism is an idol of technique, weird religion is the idol of re-enchantment, a false attempt to construct the conditions of hope. Taylor notes that modernity swept away what was thought to be superstition and ignorance, replacing them with institutional reason and natural causes. But that, of course, negates what had been viewed as sacred structure and exalted dignity. For us now, everything is resource and instrument, including humans. What the buffered self discovers is that they're free, but pointless. They're enlightened, but they're organic robots. They're meat puppets, awaiting death. So disenchantment, Taylor says, has its malaises. It's given us clean water, clean air, and clean teeth, and that illness which is life, pointless until we die. Which is nice if you can get it. Now, it's no surprise then, or it seems to me no surprise, that a good many people, perhaps especially the religious young, view modernity with increasing distaste and cynicism. For some religious people, it also provides a motivation to go back to a period of enchantment. But of course, you can't simply go back. so to re-enchant the world. And indeed, the theme and hope of re-enchantment is prevalent among many Christians right now. Now, alas, and again, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, while I have genuine sympathy for their frustrations at the state of the world, too often I think what I see is a craving for meaning rather than a craving for truth. And those are not the same thing. And sometimes they want meaning in ways which are not entirely reasonable. It's unsurprising then to see that a whole lot of apologetics has turned to the imagination rather than to reason. Now that makes sense. But when it goes wrong, I think it exhibits wooden or ham-fisted attempts of the imagination, as if re-enchantment would make the world Christian by making the world weird. When I'm trying to offend my friends who are this way, I tell them that they are guilty of the fallacy of argumentum ad C.S. Lewis. That doesn't go over very well. Consider the podcast Haunted Cosmos, which a friend tells me is quite popular in his evangelical circles. Now, it begins in a promising enough way, claiming, namely, quote, "The world we inhabit is an embattled one made up of more than just stuff." Fair enough. Good place to start, I agree. But Haunted Cosmos wishes to demonstrate this through a curiosity shop, exploring, quote, "high strangeness woven into God's world." Now, what sorts of strangeness, might you wonder? Dragons, sea monsters, Mothman, vampires, and aliens. In one of its early episodes, I know so little about podcasts. Is that what you call a podcast, an episode? Okay. Haunted Cosmos insists that this is one of the few podcasts I've ever listened to, and I found it quite disappointing. Haunted Cosmos insists, without a hint of irony, that dragons are real. This is stated explicitly, over and over again. Dragons are real. We've only mapped 5% of the ocean floor, you know. And it would be hubris to suggest that sea monsters don't lurk in the unmapped, unknown depths. Or, isn't it possible, this is the just asking question kind of form of argument, I'm just asking a question here. Isn't it possible that modern sea traffic has caused the sea monsters to go deeper than when they usually are, or to avoid shipping lanes? And don't you know that we have solid biblical evidence? See the book of Job. And don't you know that we have eyewitness accounts from sailors in the age of exploration? Now, if, like me, you roll your eyes, you are met with this response, verbatim from the podcast: "You're boring." If you're looking for reasonable accounts, we have bad imagination because we are moderns who just want everything to boil down to what we already know. We want a boring world because we are boring people who want to get cognitive closure as quickly as possible. All direct quotes. Now, all of this, by the way, they say, is in Lewis's Space Trilogy, and then I quote, "and it's in the Bible. It's in the Bible and in the Ransom Trilogy." This is argumentum ad Lewis on steroids. Now, one might think with its thick sacramentology, Roman Catholics might avoid some of these issues. We have something hyper-real, and it's a little weird. Built right into the faith. Now, here again, though, one observes many younger Catholics, perhaps especially the most faithful, struggle against the formlessness that they find so prevalent in the modern world and at times in their own religious community, and sometimes they turn to external form to resolve the confusion and the thinness, which I think is idyllic. Now, it's hard to blame them. As you know, if you show up at your average parish, it is, in the words of Bishop Barron, beige. I can sympathize with a young person, pious and devout, who looks at that and politely declines. The loss of beauty in the Catholic Church is a self-inflicted wound, and it offends the spirit of the fervent young person who's looking for transcendence rather than immanent frame. We had this thing, we had this real thing, we had this transcendent thing, we got rid of it? Everybody else is trapped within the immanent frame, and we put ourselves within the same frame. Why would we do that? So it's unsurprising to me to see a resurgent traditionalism. The impulse makes sense, is entirely understandable. I myself cannot understand why so many older Catholics are confused by the resurgent, the causes of which seem pretty obvious. But I do find it confusing when the energy of that resurgence is directed to external forms as if they equaled the reality that those external forms reflect. or as if recovering those external forms will manifest the substantial form just per se. If an external form has meaning in light of what it represents or reflects, the real attention and purpose is on the reality indicated, the actual inner form of the thing, not its external manifestation. To attend to the external is to misdirect one's attention. It's akin, I remember this from my Anglican days, it's akin to fantasizing about the sacramental imagination without paying any attention to the sacrament. You get a lot of this if you've been reading about dime square Catholicism. Lots of atheists running around in New York wearing chapel veils. Lots of atheists learning Gregorian chant. Lots of Catholics insisting on the Latin Mass, but denying church teachings about everything else. Now, it seems to me you can't have the sacramental imagination if there aren't sacraments. The way I put this to my Lewis friends is, you can't get Narnia's wardrobe door without the tabernacle and the one housed in the tabernacle. Now, I get it. It's understandable that we want stability, security, clarity, and even better things like enchantment, beauty, fullness, order. That's not our lot, it would seem. And we do no good if we confuse an external form, something that we hold on to as if the external form provides certainty and stability and clarity and meaning. If we confuse the external form with the substantial form which gives that exterior thing meaning. Let alone if we place our hope in the external form and our imagined meaning about it. I'm not buying it. In fact, we then cause a whole lot of harm when you see Catholics turn against each other about the external form. And in so doing, push the substance right to the corners while convincing onlookers that there was no substance there to begin with, all of which emboldens our cultured despisers. Habits of hope. Here's what I'm suggesting. Despair cannot be overcome with certainty or perfection or with a mood, but only by hope and the truth of concrete actions taken in light of hope. I get it. Hope, the word hope, cannot but seem inadequate or even a little corny. The world's in flames, and I suggest hope. How quaint. How quaint. But hope is not blind. It's not presumption. Nor is hope merely optimistic. Nor is hope something we churn up in ourselves as a kind of subjective attitude. Hope is a virtue, and one, in the end, given by God, although we can cooperate with that grace. It is a state, as a virtue, which perfects us, makes us well, capable of thinking, living, and acting in excellence. Hope is a perfection of the will. When the love of God floods our heart through the gift of the Holy Spirit, we are given the possibility of real and genuine self-transcendence. The divine agent calls forth the possibility of that supernatural vocation which is proper to us, even though that supernatural vocation outstrips our own ability to actualize it, and yet it is never actualized without our cooperation. So, without the light of faith, the exclusive humanism described in the earlier chapters is, it seems to me, all that remains for a whole lot of people, except exclusive humanism and its rationalist plans and its activism and its inner-worldly religions are all pathological because they can't deliver what hope seeks. They cannot deliver that arduous good or that desirable good, that difficult good, which is beatitude, which hope has as its proper object. Faith, however, places our human concerns in a kind of shadow. It reveals our human concerns as non-ultimate, not the first things, while at the same time revealing that our human temporal concerns are not merely human. They're non-ultimate, but they're not just merely human as if they don't matter, but that they are caught up into the divine light and the divine love, which is always concerned with human things. So concerned, in fact, as to become man and to join in those same ordinary human concerns and to elevate and glorify those ordinary human concerns through and in the work and person of Jesus Christ. Now, since even the human work of Jesus, the works of his human nature, have the divine person of the Son as their source, His human acts are caught up into the visible mission of the second person of the Trinity. His human acts are sanctified beyond merely human measure. In other words, human concerns are placed into a shadow, they're not ultimate, while at the same time, the ultimate has elevated and glorified and sanctified them to being good and meaningful and true. Here's what I'm suggesting. The human good participates in ultimate meaning and purpose, which is the only condition of possibility of hope. There are no others. All others are idyllic and idolatrous. In the remarkable encyclical Spe Salvi, Benedict XVI explores the meaning of the phrase, "In hope we were saved," from Romans 8. Here's what he says. Faith reveals that life will not end in the grave or in pointlessness. And so the future, the eschaton, is known as good rather than fearsome or empty. It is possible, he says, to live the present in that same way, however difficult the present happens to be. Still, at the same time, Benedict suggests that hope has become for many people, sidebar, he blames Luther's translation for this, but there's no reason to pile on. Benedict XVI suggests that hope for many people has become reduced to its subjective sense as the expression of an interior attitude. Some people are just kind of hopeful, right? So when my wife rolls out of the bed every morning at like 5 o'clock, like just before her alarm goes off, I hear her turn off the alarm, and I can sort of like feel her inner mood of like, another day, the birds are singing, I'm gonna do my prayers, I'm gonna go to the gym, I'm gonna have breakfast, it's going to be great. I'm gonna work hard, raise the children, deal with my husband, right? And just after my alarm goes off, I think, I'm alive again, right? That's not what we mean by a hope. Hope is not a personality trait. Hope is not a temperament. Hope is not a subjective disposition. It's a virtue. And virtues are never reduced merely to temperament or attitude, even though all virtues change and alter our affective responses to the world. Reducing hope to an airy atmosphere makes hope somewhat disreputable, kind of silliness. Just hope. In what? Like, just hoping is not a virtue. Hope is a gift of the Holy Spirit, in which I'm confident that the divine agency is concerned to provide and allow my attainment of that difficult good, which is eternal happiness, and is not unconcerned with my temporal happiness at the same time. Hope is a perfection of the human. Now, as Benedict teaches, a misunderstanding of hope has deformed the truth. In Hebrews, we are told that faith is the hypostasis of things hoped for, the proof of things not seen. Faith is the hypostasis of things hoped for, the proof of things not seen. Benedict intentionally leaves hypostasis untranslated, since much depends on the translation. The medievals tended to translate hypostasis as substantia, substance. And that then meant that faith is the substance of things hoped for, which turns the notion of proof into a substantial proof. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the proof of things not seen. On this reading, faith, which is an infused virtue, is a stable disposition of the person resulting from grace. And as a result, it takes root in us, and reason is led to consent in what it does not see. This is not thus, faith is an assurance of things hoped for. Faith is a commitment of things hoped for. Faith is a confidence in things hoped for. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the proof. See how proof is different than assurance? Assurance is a subjective disposition of certitude. I feel certain that I'm going to heaven. That's probably a problem, right? Whereas I have a proof that the divine agent is quite a different thing. Now, what's the proof? Here's Benedict's argument. Faith gives to us now and already. Now and already. And because it's an infused virtue, it gives and makes present the things that are hoped for, namely salvation and true life. But this true life is not merely a matter for the eschaton. It's already present. The kingdom of God is at hand. And we have a proof or a certainty of those things we hoped for because the divine life is already infused in us. We are already now possessing the merits of Christ through adoption. The life of Christ is given to us already, now, so that the Father might love in us what he loved in the Son. It's preface 7 from Ordinary Time. It's one of my favorites, that the Father might love in us what he loved in the Son. Now. Why? Because the merits of Christ are given to us now. Everything that is the Father's is given to the Son, and the merits of the Son are given to us because we are adopted into his life. Our identity is caught up in his. Now, since that life, the merits of Christ given to us, are present substantially even now, it's already known. Its reality is known, which is its evidence or its proof. Ordinary human actions, as a result, are given meaning by an experience of love and purpose that we already have now, even as we anticipate their fullness in the future. Human things are not ultimate, but they're not merely human. They're sanctified and caught up by the merits of Christ given to us. As a result, instead of optimism, activism, re-enchantment, and the despair, which I think always follows on that, I happen to think, I wonder what you think, I'm predicting here, so take that with a grain of salt. I happen to think that the re-enchantment project is going to lead to even more despair when people realize that you can't gussy up enchantment. Like either the thing is there or not. You can't feel the thing is there for very long. No wardrobe without the tabernacle. So instead of activism and the despair, which I think is likely to follow, Benedict tells us that faith draws the future into the present, really and actually present as a property given from the Father to his really and completely adopted children. So you're a Protestant, right? In most versions of Protestantism, you have Christ's righteousness imputed to you, right? It's declared as if true of us. Whereas the Catholic understanding is that the merits of Christ are infused in us really and substantially. His righteousness is our righteousness. When? Now. Why? Because we are not merely legally adopted children, we are completely adopted children. We're not understood merely to belong in the family. We have become really and substantially incorporated into the divine life so that we can live in this world with a persevering patience, in real and genuine hope, not in its false images or its false idols. Now, if you recall, my account began with Olga, trapped in the radical imminence of the prison of herself and her room and her children. She's terrified of turning into the Poverella, the woman who's poor, the woman who doesn't matter, who disappears from sight. For Olga, the normal things of life, such as marriage and children, are sources of despair and disgust rather than joy, love, and hope. She lacks even simple natural optimism, even natural hope. Ferrante's novels are bleak. There are no idols in her writing, and certainly not in her vision of motherhood. But on the other hand, there is no better image of actual hope than another mother. Not any mother, but our mother, Our Lady. To the possibility of motherhood, she says, "Let it be," and rejoices. Now, notice how she acts. She ponders. She asks a certain question, and she accepts. Unlike Zechariah, who was troubled and afraid and demanded proof, the Virgin, full of grace, said yes, fiat, and asks only how it will be accomplished. Not whether it will be accomplished, but how it will be accomplished, without denying that it is true. That's hope. She has hope and is a source of hope. Sancta Maria Spes Nostra, Holy Mary, our hope. And as a result, all generations remember and call her blessed, because she did not reject her child, who has become our brother and our Savior and the source of all hope. Thank you. We got 12 minutes for questions, unless Carl will let us go long. Or disagreements or challenges. The last time I gave a talk similar to this, the enchantment section made many younger people unhappy with me.
So, okay, along those lines, thank you very much for this. This is interesting and certainly picking up what you're laying down about enchantment. I remember a book about how to be more like G.K. Chesterton, saying you should just believe in fairies. Yeah, but if you don't think fairies are real, you can't just believe in them.
And they're not real, it turns out.
But I'm curious, when you mention writing books for students, as Carl said, and when you mention younger people's reactions, how have you found younger people's reactions to the story of Olga and the way that you're reading it with disenchantment here?
Yeah, So not in Days of Abandonment, but in the Neapolitan series, the main protagonist begins the book by disappearing entirely. Her friend goes to her home, everything is gone. Clothing is gone, pictures are gone, the home has been dusted. And the friend remembers that the goal of the main character, my brilliant friend, was to disappear as if she had never been. So I was talking about this with a Villanova student. I said, I don't understand this at all. Like, it seems to me that your generation wants more than anything to be seen. Right? Like, hey, look, Grand Canyon. Oh, look, Death Camp, right? Like, there's just the constantness of presentation and representation. And she told me, her response was, no, my friends and I are doing that so we will never be seen, right? Thus, the endlessness of the filters and the endlessness of the contrivancy of the representation so that they will disappear. So her response to me was, I resonate entirely with the ideal of wishing to disappear entirely and to not be. I think you can see pale reflections of that in the refusal to marry, the refusal to have children, the vision of children, right, progeny, posterity, as something not to be embraced. I mean, if Aristotle's right that we have children for a kind of immortality, to refuse to have children is to wish to disappear. So I was surprised by her response to that, and I was really taken with it, that there is a sense of don't notice me, even while I'm creating a kind of simulacra of me to notice. It's all Avatar noticing, don't notice me. I found that really gut-wrenching, actually. Please.
Like Dr. Prothero said, thank you for your talk. And I did have a question about the enchantment section, actually.
Good.
I'm just wondering, you made it seem like in seeking to return to, I assume you were talking about the extraordinary form.
No.
I mean, you mentioned the
I
Latin
could be an
Mass,
example of it, but I got no beefs to pick with the Latin Mass.
Yeah, no, I guess just in general with reverence, I agree with you that, right, the focus should not be on the external, and that the focus should be on our Lord, who is the victim and the priest. I guess what I was wondering is, do you think your presentation of the problems, could also make room for the sacramentality of the sacrament? What I mean is the externals do point to God.
Of course.
And I just wondered if you could make a clarification maybe, or just about like that it's when we lose sight of Jesus and not like to the detriment of that and focus on the externals.
Of course externals matter, right? Worship should be befitting the reality of that which is occurring, right?
Yes.
So think about the grandeur of old European cities. So old European cities in many ways are grandiose because they're built around tabernacles. So we build a church around the tabernacle, and then we build the town around the church, right? So everything is built around the tabernacle, which is why it's glorious as opposed to, I don't know, Denver. It's just not built that way. Everything's on a grid. It's easy to get around, right? But it's not built around the tabernacle, okay? It's a flat town near mountains, okay? It's a flat town. Of course the external should befit the reality that's being communicated, of course. At the same time, my wife sent me a snapshot a couple months ago. I don't use it in the talk because it makes people mad because they think I'm actually picking a fight with chapel veils, which I'm not because I don't care. And it was this. This is the church sign out front. Although not wearing a chapel veil is not a sin, comma, like, whoa, it is fitting. Whoa, we got a problem. Like, if you have a sign which says, although wearing a chapel veil is not a sin, you have confused the externals for the permissible, even the fitting, right? Maybe it is fitting. It's actually not that long of it was not a fixed tradition in the church. If you look at canon law, it's pretty brief. It's pretty brief. It's pretty brief, I think, to want to turn to a moment from a period in time of the church as if it is the tradition in the church. We all know that's not true. The tradition of the church is a lively and dynamic thing. And my worry is that, again, I'm picking no fights with trads. Most of my friends would probably describe me as a trad because, I believe in God and marriage. Country, I'm a little wavery about. But you know the distinction between tradition, which is the living faith of the dead, and traditionalism, which is the dead faith of the living. The living faith of the dead is not going to promise certainty and fixity. So what I'm really worried about is what I see, suggest for your reflection, I may be wrong about this, what I see is a kind of Catholic fundamentalism lurking at the edges, where we want it to stop. Like it's a difficult time, yeah? Things feel unstable, things feel decentered. In society, in the church, in family, like everything feels wobbly, right? You know the idea of liquid modernity? Rusty Reno had a great phrase lately, right? We don't need more openness in our society because what we're all doing is drowning in liquid modernity. It's filling our lungs, the liquidity of modernity. Some of us at least, are looking for an island of fixity or what have you, yeah? That fixity is not going to give you permanence. That fixity will give you an immovable rock. But that immovable rock still has to withstand all the torments and gates of hell. It won't be broken, but there's no period of the church that you can turn to and say like, oh, that was a great time in the church. It was always awful. Cardinal Sarah reminds us that the very first Eucharist received was profaned. The very first person who received the very first Eucharist was Judas. The first one. There's never been a glorious golden time of the church because we are what church are we? The church triumphant, the church suffering, or the church militant? We're not the church glorious.
You guys should know this.
Yeah, which one are we?
The last one.
Yeah. And that's what it's going to be. You don't get to escape the fray. You don't get to escape the fight by finding a kind of moment or mood which allows you to abstract from what just is going to be the daily challenge of converting your own soul, of cooperating with grace, of bearing witness, of keeping the teachings of the church, of trying to pay attention during Mass, and of trying to contribute in keeping with the station of life to the redemption and perfection and elevation of the world. There's no other option. Pick up the cross. That's what we're told. We're not told like there's a moment where the cross goes away and we've got a nice aesthetic life. Doesn't happen, and it's an idol. I'm not picking a fight with the Latin Mass. I'm not picking a fight with the external forms. I'm all for it, right? I too roll my eyes when I hear the best of 1982 start to come out from the choir. Please.
Thank you so much for coming and for your talk. I was very moved by your section on hope, especially in light of the Pilgrims of Hope this upcoming year, 2025. My question is, especially as we've discussed hope as a virtue, which is animated by faith, and so in proposing hope as a solution to chaos, what does that have to say for those who've divorced themselves from God, who don't have faith, who, if hope is grounded in faith, what's the proposal for those?
They're without hope in this world. Aren't we told that? They are really Now, there is a natural analog to hope, right? So hope in its proper theological... So Aquinas in the Summa, in the section on hope, articulates hope, the theological virtues, with explicit reference to that controversial understanding of twofold happiness, the duplex felicitas, right? How to understand that has been a controversy of the 20th century, let's say. Fair enough? And yet, the theological virtues outstrip merely human capacity. There is a natural analog to hope. So hope is an act of the will which reaches for a not present good, which is a difficult or arduous good. You can have natural hopes, but theological hopes, Aquinas tells us very explicitly, you should not have theological hopes for temporal things, except in a secondary fashion. So while we pray that we have our daily bread, you can pray in hope for your daily bread, only because you are hoping that your daily bread in some fashion has reference to what you need for sanctity, what you need in order to have the practices of life, so as to be reaching for the divine beatitude. The proper object of hope is the divine beatitude. He also tells us that in the order of perfection, Charity precedes hope, precedes faith, but in the order of generation, faith precedes hope, which precedes charity, right? If you don't know the thing, this is the intellective perfection of faith, you can't really want the good because you don't know what it is, and if you don't want it, you can't seek union with it, yeah? So you have to know it to want it, to seek union with it. If you don't know it, you're without hope in this world. And so it's not surprising that as, for whatever reasons, fill in your villains, the weakness of the church, the confusion of the time, whatever, I don't know, there's 1,000 reasons that people do not have faith. Of course they will not have hope. And they will attempt to fill that vacuum with rationalism. In the book I say humanitarianism, mastery, science, clean teeth, GDP, clean water, Oxfam, all of which are very fine things, none of which are hope. And to think that they are like hope is to have something misplaced in your objective, and will soon, I think, lead either to presumption, the sense of humans can make the world perfect, rationalism, or a kind of despair, why bother, let's disappear. That seems to me to be the dialectic of our society right now, is it not? Presumption, we're going to make everything great, here's the 5-year plan. Despair, it's all nihilism, let's just fold up the tents and die. And in the middle, hope. Does that seem right to you?
Yes, I think, sorry, I was struggling to phrase my question. How, for those who don't have hope, then what? What's the solution?
Well, I don't mean, this sounds like such a dismissive answer, not to you, but to the person who doesn't have hope. You have to have faith. Real faith, though. I mean, it seems, so I'm a Catholic, I'm a convert to the church. You know, you get this advice when you go talk to priests, and you sort of come, marshaled with your theological arguments, right? So I grew up Baptist, right? So this sister of Mother Teresa's order once tricked me into a lunch. She's like, let's go to lunch. And we get there, and there's the head Jesuit from the New England provinces waiting for me. And he says, hey, what's the key what is the central Christian claim? And I was a young Baptist, so I said, justification by faith alone. And he said, Trinity maybe? You know, you get these weird answers from holy men and priests. You're like, well, I was looking for an argument, and you actually just proclaimed something. Or I remember being close to entering the church, and this same nun came back one Sunday, and she said, hey, I made a pilgrimage to New York to St. Pat's, and I went to the side chapel of Elizabeth Ann Seton to pray for your conversion, and all my prayers get answered, so let me know. The day Mother Teresa died, I came and said, I'm sorry, Sister Mary. She had gotten in a fight with Mother Teresa. It's why she was in Boston. Mother Teresa and her had gotten in a fight, and she'd sent her back to America. Who fights with Mother Teresa? The day Mother Teresa died, I said, sorry, Sister Mary Catherine, I'm so sorry to hear that Mother Teresa died. She goes, oh yeah, I know. Last night I woke up in Newton, Massachusetts, and she was standing at the foot of my bed, apologizing to me and telling me that I was right, because all my prayers are answered. Now, that was just a story to tell a story. The point is, when holy people don't give you arguments, they proclaim or bear witness. When I was almost into the church, I went to a priest and gave my sort of last gasping, I'm Anglican, it's good enough, right? And the music's better. His response was, just go sit in front of the tabernacle. And so you go and sit in front of the tabernacle, and you're sort of awkward and embarrassed, what am I doing here? And then you're bored. Then you feel guilty for being bored. And then, boom. Oh, maybe the Son of the living God is in that box over there. There's no technique or trick to move people from a lack of faith to faith because they're free. I mean, we can be clever, we can have good apologetics, we can be kind, we can bear witness in our missions, right? We've got the beauty of the saints, the blood of the martyrs, we've got all the resources we need, but at the end, you don't move someone into faith. I don't move someone into faith. We bear witness, we have faith ourselves, we live lives of holiness, and those things are, it turns out in the end, quite beautiful and quite true. And that's all we got. But on the other hand, we got God. I like to tell my children my older children, when they're starting to be like, ooh, the world's kind of scary and the church is in decline, and my response is always, we got them just where we want them. Because we have them just where we want them because nothing has changed. The Holy Spirit is at work. The Son has died and been resurrected. And the Father has begotten the Son, and with the Son spirated the Holy Spirit. What's to worry about? One more? One more. Come on, one more. Tell me I'm wrong about enchantment. Please.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong about enchantment. Because I should be interested to talk with you more about this at the reception. Much of the things that you said actually resonated with my own experience and my own entrance into the Catholic Church recently. So I was just going to ask if you had any recommendations for things to read that have particularly influenced your thoughts on that topic, especially.
Topic of what? Of enchantment?
Of enchantment or like misplaced mysticism, some of these sorts of things we see in our culture.
So I think a book which is brilliant in its distinctions is On Fairy Stories by Tolkien. Tolkien is not guilty of argumentum ad luis. He's very precise on what a fairy story is, what a fairy story is not, right? And what it reveals and what it does not. On Fairy Stories is very good at sort of true and false enchantments. That's where I would begin. I think he's very precise and very good there. Thanks, everybody. Glad to be here.